By the summer of 1968, a number of historic events had already happened that year. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, the escalating war in Vietnam, the Prague Spring, and widespread student walkouts and riots. Then came the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. This Sunday marks the 50th anniversary of the beginning of that fateful gathering. There were many photographers there, but two Chicagoans captured images that are only now being seen for the first time. Eddie Garuza shows us what they witnessed.
The 1968 Democratic National Convention kicked off with controversy. The Queen of Soul delivered a rousing rendition of the national anthem, but not everyone liked it. Some older white traditionalists found Aretha Franklin's Star-Spangled Banner disrespectful. But that outrage was fleeting as events inside and outside the International Amphitheater turned chaotic and bloody in the coming days. In the summer of 1968, Chicagoan Al Lieberman was a 29-year-old budding photographer. His wife Arlene was a schoolteacher, and while the two say they weren't especially political, they did have strong convictions about one major issue.
I was against the war. My best friend was killed in Vietnam, so I was against that war.
And yet the Liebermans say that's not what drew them to Grant Park in late August 1968, as mostly young people gathered to sing, dance, and voice their anti-war and anti-establishment sentiments. Al and Arlene say they just wanted to take in the show, and Al brought along his Leica M2 camera to capture what they saw.
It was fascinating for me. Once I got there, it just sucked into the whole thing.
What Al Lieberman found at first was a party atmosphere where peace and love reigned. But in due time, the signs came out, the chanting grew louder, and some notable counterculture figures showed up. Among them was the group that would become known as the Chicago Seven. At one point, Al Lieberman just happened to run into poet Allen Ginsberg.
I was at the beach early in the morning. I wanted to see the sunrise. And he came walking across the bridge. I just said hi, and he said hi, and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to the beach for a ceremony."
Over the course of nearly a week, Al Lieberman snapped almost 3,000 photographs of the happening in Grant Park, from its peaceful start to its violent conclusion. And his photos are only now coming to light. Rich Cahan of Chicago City File Press was contacted by Lieberman's oldest son about his dad's photos. And Cahan says what he found is an important treasure trove of that watershed event. Nearly 24 of Lieberman's photos have been published for the first time in the August issue of Chicago Magazine.
We're so used to seeing the police confrontations, and here Al really concentrated on life in the parks and the Festival of Peace and the things that kind of went around the convention.
Another 29-year-old Chicago photographer snapping photos at the 1968 convention was K. Kofi Moyo. At the time, he was a teacher at John Marshall High School, but his mother, who was also a photographer, had taught him all about the craft. And even without press credentials, Moyo managed to get into the convention at the International Amphitheater.
Once I got inside, which was sort of tricky to get inside, I sort of prevailed myself upon an Andy Frayne usher at that time, if you'll remember who those people were. And so I grabbed as much as I could, as quickly as I could.
Among his photographs is one of Mayor Richard J. Daley seemingly at the center of it all. As for his use of a fisheye lens,
big picture. Take it all in. Again, I had a very short window, so to speak.
Outside the convention hall, Moyo witnessed the violent confrontations between protesters and police and National Guard. Only 4 months earlier, Kofi Moyo had captured the uprising on Chicago's West Side following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But Moyo says he saw a clear distinction between what happened in his neighborhood and the bloody clashes in Grant Park.
There's a difference between a riotous behavior and rebellion. Rebellion has substance. I mean, there's a reason for that, but riotous behavior can take place at any particular time, and that's what we have here, a police riot.
Al and Arlene Lieberman say they tried to stay out of the fray as the demonstrations heated up, but ultimately they couldn't escape.
The cops kept saying, "Get back, get back." And all of a sudden there was a tear gas coming, and they had their masks on, and we had nothing. And it was dark, and it was scary.
Al Lieberman became the victim of the melee after protesters gathered around the John Logan statue on South Michigan Avenue.
Everybody was climbing down and walking. When I was walking up the hill, and the policeman just right in front of me took his stick and just hit me right in the lens.
50 years later, the Liebermans have some fond memories of that historic summer of '68. One of them involves the pig named Pegasus that Students for a Democratic Society nominated for president. Al Lieberman photographed the swine as Chicago police took it into custody.
They grabbed the pig, and the protesters are yelling, they want their pig back. Give us they nominated him for president, so they wanted him back.
One of the last photos Al Lieberman took was on the morning after the convention ended. It shows a young protester with a head wound being mocked by National Guardsmen, a distressing coda to an unfortunate chapter in the city's history. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Eddie Aruza.